You see it all the time on YouTube.
Epic campsites.
Spectacular spots with unobstructed views up at the top of some mountain somewhere. Peacefully private lakeside clearings with no one else around for miles. Calming creekside campsites guaranteed to make you sleep like a baby. And probably need to pee a lot.
Evacuation beginning.
Anyway, if you've ever wondered how to find spots like those, then you are in luck, because in this video I'm going to share all of my best tips and tricks that I have picked up over the years that have helped us find sites like this one, and this one, and that one, and you get the point. So jumping right into tip number one, and that is to explore spur roads. And if you've done any amount of exploring in national forest or BLM land, and this one probably sounds a little bit obvious, but the truth is probably 90% of the best campsites we have ever found have been off the beaten path and off the main Forest Service roads and down off some sort of spur road. Now typically a spur road is a smaller and less developed road that branches off of a main Forest Service road. Sometimes they go for miles, sometimes they dead end after maybe 100 yards or so. And so if I'm looking for a campsite, typically I will try and identify which spur roads end before too long, because usually when a spur road ends, more often than not, there is a campsite there with an established fire ring and things like that. And if you have Gaia GPS, which is what we use, or some other sort of mapping software, then you can oftentimes look at the map to see how far that spur road goes. And if you see that it dead ends not too far away, then there's a pretty good chance that there will be a campsite at the end. And one other note here as we're talking about spur roads is that there is nothing wrong with getting out of your vehicle and scouting on foot. In fact, this is a tip that I have picked up over the years, and typically if I am going to look to go down a spur road, if I don't have a high degree of confidence that it is going to go through or that it's going to be wide enough for the truck, I will often get out and walk the first 50 or so yards to see if I feel like it's worth venturing down that path. And I say this because inevitably as you start exploring spur roads, you're gonna find yourself needing to back out. And depending on how tight things get and how narrow things get and how far you need to back out, it can be a little less than fun. Take a minute, get out of the truck, walk it, and see if it's worth heading down there. And rolling into tip number two, and that is to study Google satellite imagery. Now, this is best done in the pre-planning phase of a trip before you head out on the trail, but you can possibly do this while you are out on the trail if you have a cellular connection or if you have downloaded maps. But what I like to do here is I like to pull up Google satellite imagery for areas along the route that I plan to be traveling. And what I'm looking for are things like clearings, things like established fire pits, which by the way, Google satellite imagery is often detailed enough where you can see sites that have established fire rings, which is super cool because it means you know that there is a campsite there.
Enhance.
In some cases, you can also find vehicles at spots. And so if you see a vehicle in a clearing, chances are that is an established dispersed campsite. And then what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna mark those coordinates, copy those coordinates out of Google, and you're gonna import them to something like Gaia. Again, if you use Gaia or whatever system you use, just import those coordinates and mark a spot on the map. And then when you're out along your route, you have a spot marked and you can drive to it and check it out and see if it is a dispersed campsite. So oftentimes before we leave on a trip, I'll do this with maybe 4, 5, 6 different campsites that I've identified that depending on how much progress we've made through the day and what we're looking for, we can at least stop and check out and see if it's a good place to stop for the night. And so it kind of takes some of the guesswork out of it. But I think the best thing to do now is to head over to the computer and show you exactly what I'm talking about. So let's do it. All right, so here we are in Google Maps. I'm gonna show you in real time the process that I go through when I am looking for dispersed campsites and how I do that in Google Maps, and specifically looking at satellite imagery. So here we are in kind of the greater Washington state area. And for the purposes of this, I am going to look for campsites, let's say north of Mount Rainier National Park, south of the town of Greenwater. So if we zoom in a little bit, this is kind of the area here that I am going to be targeting. I happen to know that there are a number of campsites down in this area as well. So the first thing I'm gonna do before I zoom in any further is I'm gonna change this map layer here to satellite. And you can do that here in the bottom left, click on satellite, and this is going to give us the satellite imagery view. And this is really what we're looking for. So as I zoom in further, you're gonna start to see, Google is gonna start to show you some of the Forest Service roads that are here in these these gray lines here. It's worth noting that the detail when it comes to Forest Service roads in Google Maps is okay, but it's not that great. Most of the main roads, more well-traveled roads are marked, but many of the spur roads and offshoots are not. And so I'm looking at the main roads, but I'm also looking at, probably more so than anything else, I'm looking at clearings that show up in the map, little kind of dots in the forest. And so right away, I see a couple down here. I'm trying to get as close to the national park as I can, so we're gonna go far south. You see here, the road on Google Maps ends right here, but you see this cut in the forest, and you can follow it down here. If we zoom in a little bit further, and then at the end of that cut, you see this kind of open space. And this is really interesting to me. So I'm gonna zoom in further on this. And as I do, look at that. Right away, you can see a clearing, and not only can you see a clearing, you can actually see a fire ring. And so this is a good indication that there's a dispersed campsite here. What you can do as you're zoomed in is you can look at the road and you can see what kind of road are we looking at. This one is 2-track, and it looks like it is maybe a little bit tight. It's not obviously a major road, but it looks to me to be passable. And so this is an area that I might mark on the map. If I zoom back out, there's another spot that looks really intriguing to me right away. And again, there's no road from Google here. That ends up here. But if you follow this cut all the way down to where this cut ends, what do we have if we zoom in here? Again, we have a big clearing with a fire ring right in the middle. So another great indication that there may be a dispersed campsite here. And so I find this interesting, and I want to mark this in Gaia GPS because that's what we use to navigate when we are out on a trip. And so the easiest way to do that is simply to left click right where you want to be. This is going to pull up, if you look at the bottom here, coordinates. And so what you want to do is you want to take your mouse, drag across, copy these coordinates. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into Gaia GPS, and up in this upper left search bar, I'm simply going to paste the coordinates in, click on it, and this is going to give me the particular spot on the map that we just found in Google Maps. Now, I already happen to have this one marked, but if you didn't, all you would need to do is click on Save Waypoint here. You can name the waypoint, you can add notes to the waypoint. It's all super cool. And so that's just a little demonstration of what I'm looking for. And I hope that was helpful to show you in a little more detail and actually in real time what that looks like. So now let's go back to the video.
And tip number 3, while we're on the subject of maps, is to consult topographic map data. While Google Satellite Imagery is great to help you identify where potential dispersed campsites may be, topographic map data helps uncover roads that lead up the side of mountains to the top of ridges or hills. And if you're looking for a campsite with expansive views, these are the roads that you're going to want to venture up. And these are usually the areas that I give the most priority to when we are looking for a place to camp and I am studying for dispersed campsites, because for me personally, I love campsites that have massive panoramic views. They're just my favorite. But if you prefer camping by lakes or creeks or rivers, you can apply these same principles using topographic map data and following rivers and looking for spur roads that dead end near a lake or a river or something like that. Once again, let's head over to the computer and I will show you what I'm talking about.
All right, so we're here again in Google Maps. We're still looking at the same area that we were before. We're still looking at the satellite imagery. And while you can get a little bit of an idea of the topography through the satellite imagery, valleys and ridges and such, it's definitely nowhere near as detailed as it could be or would be if you were looking at a topographic map. And you can do that in Google by down in the bottom left here, switching over and clicking on terrain. And right away you can see a ton more detail when it comes to the topography. You can see here, for example, if you look at this ridge, you can follow this ridge all the way up here. Or if you're looking for something that's down at a lower elevation, you can see the river, you can see these creeks and streams. And so if you're looking to camp by, a river or a creek, you can start looking at that right there. Now, one of the things that I want to show you here as an example is here we are in Google Maps.
And as I mentioned earlier, Google Maps is not the most detailed when it comes to showing Forest Service roads. And so I want to compare this area to the same area in Gaia and look at this. So here we are in Gaia, we're looking at the same area, we've got the topographic map data, but look at all these spur roads that do not show up in Google. And so when I'm trying to use topographic maps to find potential dispersed campsites, I actually like to start in Gaia and then input coordinates into Google satellite imagery to verify if there might be a dispersed campsite there. So basically the reverse of what we're doing. So starting at Gaia, you can see ridges, right? Look, you can see this ridge right here. If you look at the topographic map, it just follows along the top of a ridge. You can see another one right here. And so I'm kind of interested in this one because this one, if you look at it, it just follows this ridge all the way here to where it dead ends. And so what I'm going to do is zoom in on this area. I'm going to click here and I'm going to take these coordinates, and in Gaia it's up here in the upper left. So same thing, I'm going to copy it, same idea as what we did in Google. Now I'm going to switch over to Google and I'm going to go to the top left here and I'm going to paste these coordinates in, and that's going to give us the exact spot. So this is the spot that I was just looking at on Gaia. Now you can see here, this is an example of what I was talking about. In Gaia it showed a road here, in Google Maps it doesn't. But what I like to do here is I like to go back to layers and I like to look at the satellite layer again. Now that we've got the satellite layer pulled up, if we zoom in, look at that. So again, right there, end of the road, looks like there might be a fire ring there. Looks like there definitely may be a campsite, and it's right at the top of a ridge. So that is a super interesting spot to check out. So I would mark that in Gaia again, and that would be one of the areas that I would want to check out. So there's a little demo of how you can use topographic data along with satellite imagery to try and find some dispersed campsites that might give you spectacular views.
Okay, and on to tip number 4, which is to do pre-trip research along the route that you are planning. Now there are a lot of ways to go about doing this research, but a few things that I like to do before any trip are, 1, to start by watching some YouTube videos. So I'll pull up a search for a particular route or trail or area that we plan on traveling in, and I'll watch other YouTubers' videos along that same route. And oftentimes they will have stayed at some amazing campsite, and what I find interesting about this is once you understand how to read maps and you understand how to look at routes, it becomes relatively easy to find the areas that they are camped in, or at least close to the areas that they are camped in. And so oftentimes you can find breadcrumbs in other people's YouTube videos that can lead you to the same epic campsites that they are at.
Found anything yet? Nothing yet, sir!
Another tip here when doing pre-trip research is to consult various websites that include those routes that you plan on taking. So one of my personal favorites is trailsoffroad.com. Now, I'm not affiliated at all with Trails Off-Road, but I do pay for their subscription and I do find it incredibly helpful when it comes to finding dispersed campsites, assuming that I'm going to be on a route that they have logged, basically. Because on routes that they have logged, oftentimes they have dispersed campsites marked at certain waypoints along the route with pictures on the website. So it can be a pretty cool way to get an idea of what might be out there, and if there is some epic campsite that you don't want to miss. We found a few campsites that way as well, and they have been great. So just a couple tips on doing some pre-trip planning. All right, and tip number 5 for how to find incredible dispersed campsites, and that is, do not be afraid to explore. You've got to be willing to strike out on some of these as you explore, because you will. Some of the roads will be tight, some will be overgrown and result in pinstriping, and some will just turn into nothing and you will have to back up. But don't let that deter you, because eventually if you stick with it, you will find some of the best campsites out in all of the national forest and BLM land by taking this approach. But as you're exploring, do be smart about it. If a road looks like it's getting too narrow or too technical or is making you uncomfortable, then don't be afraid to cut your losses, turn around, and try another one. And also along with this is to always be aware of the next spot that you could potentially turn around should the road turn into something that you don't want to continue down. I always do this, make a mental note of the areas that I could potentially turn around in so that I know how far I might need to back up should the road become something that we don't want to tackle. And so now you have some tips that will hopefully help you find those amazing, epic dispersed campsites that you always see on the YouTubes. And if you're trying to figure out how to plan a route to get to those epic dispersed campsites, then check out this video next, where I break down all the tips and strategies on how to plan an amazing overland route. Thanks for watching.